Hello and welcome to the Freedom Anarchist News Review. With me, I have Kell. Hello, Kell.
Hello.
Uh, and we have, as our topics for tonight, McSweeney has been removed from his infamous role at the heart of the Labour Party machine. But does it mean very much? Does seem to have kicked off a clearing house of sorts. So we'll be talking about that. We'll follow on from that with a climate story. So heavy rains as a factor of climate change and how it's been exposing the continued shortcomings of infrastructure, given that the talk is increasingly turning to how we cope with climate change as opposed to how we stop it. Um, we'll then talk about Jim Boyling, the spy cop who is currently speaking on how his senior managers didn't care in the least about spy cops sleeping with activists, to nobody's real shock, but it is stark how blunt he's being about it. And then we'll finish off with freedom news stories, including the Winter Olympics protests and West Bank displacements. So, starting off with the first one, McSweeney's gone. What are your thoughts, Cal?
Well, I think it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it's just another advisor being sacked, and we've seen this before with Sue Gray and others. But I think with Sweet McSweeney, what we see is the start of the beginning of the end of the last vestiges of the New Labour project. But I think what's most important in terms of this is the effect it's going to have on the potential leaders after the lame duck presidency, which is Starmer clinging on through effectively what I think is happening now in politics is that Keir Starmer is a dead duck in the water, and somebody needs to bring in the knives. But nobody wants to bring in the knives because nobody wants to be stuck being leader of the Labour Party with the bloodbath of the May elections. So they're all, even though last week he was at this incredibly vulnerable moment, nobody wanted to wield the knife because if you kill off Steer Starmer now, by the time you get to be leader, the May elections was, and it'll be your fault. That's the way politics works. It's not fair, but it's the truth. And who are the prime people to take over from Starmer? Wes Streeting, Rachel Reeves, possibly Shabina Mahmood, all be better together, all McSweeney proteges, all with their arms absolutely up to the elbows in genocide, all friends of Peter Mandelson. None of them, all of them desperately, desperately trying to get away, get some clear water between Starmer, McSweeney, and Mandelson. And all the time, all the dirt keeps coming out. Yesterday or today, we have these really dangerous WhatsApp messages from Wes Streeting talking to Mandelson in this conversation about him saying that, of course, the war crimes were committed, of course, there were crimes of humanity. And that's not what any of the potential leadership of the Labour Party thought that they were going to happen. I think Wes Streeting has been seeing himself for a while as the heir apparent to Starmer.
Yeah, definitely.
And for a lot of reasons, I mean, he literally sacrificed the LGBT community so he could get a red box. He sold trans people down the river. Don't forget, he used to work for Stonewall. He was on the television saying trans women are women, trans men are men. And now he's there having apologized, having, mea culpa'd, all that kind of stuff in the cabinet, being the golden boy. And suddenly the House of Cards is in danger and Wes Streeting's position. So you've seen yesterday Wes Streeting beginning to say things like, oh, well, maybe, Israel shouldn't be acting in impunity. Maybe, he's trying to distance himself from that project which Starmer is completely centered on. And now with Morgan McSweeney going and the Labour Better Together, is it called Better Together? I think it is. Um, that toxic brand at the centre of the Labour government. Um, you know, um, Wes Streeting's absolutely tarnished and attached to that. Rachel Reeves not in a good position, A, because of obviously her chancellorship has been a disaster, but also because she also up to her eyeballs in it. Shabina Mahmood, the same. So the people that we thought were going to be standing for leadership in the summer are all absolutely stuffed. And I think
Yeah.
that's what Morgan McSweeney had, the sacking of Morgan McSweeney has left us with, is this possibility that some outside of the main core candidatures is going to have to come from someone who is capable of sweeping the stable clean. And I think the other problem that the Labour Party has got over this is now we know that Mandelson sat there with McSweeney and Starmer and went through every single candidate for the Labour leadership, MPs, and threw out all of the left. So the other problem that the Labour Party has got with the sacking of McSweeney and with the ending of associations with Mandelson is all of those loyal foot soldiers, hand-picked by Mandelson and McSweeney. Somebody has got to be found who is not tainted, who can lead the Labour Party after the May elections. And I, at the moment, don't know who it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with pretty much all of that. I think McSweeney's done an incredible job of locking in the Labour right to the extent that there were only really two unifying left, soft left characters, uh, Andy Burnham and Angela Rayner.
Yeah.
Rayner, I think, very unfortunately for the Labour Party, actually got caught up in that whole, did she or didn't she accidentally or intentionally not pay her taxes um, on the stamp duty on that house, and Burnham got caught out by essentially a coalition of people who wanted either Streeting or Mahmood or one of those two essentially, to be the following person, and has now been kept out. But as you say, like the Mandelson case is so staining to everyone who has any association with not just Mandelson, but Keir Starmer, actually. Anyone who is associated with Starmer and Morgan McSweeney in any way gets the same kind of, well, these people are the cut from the same cloth, essentially.
I think the
Um,
other thing that's interesting about Mandelson in relation to this, in relation to, is back in the 90s when they were doing the New Labour project and they were cutting the left out of the Labour Party with a scalpel or possibly even with a spade. Mandelson was quoted as saying, when he was asked about, white working class voters in the cities that always voted Labour, he said they've got nowhere else to go. And now we live in a time when they really do have somewhere to go. They have Reform and they have the Green Party. And so the dynamics of the sort of party which Morgan McSweeney and Mandelson were trying to impose on the political centre, left, right, whatever we call it, that weird area that Labour occupies. But the practice that New Labour set up and the strategies that Morgan McSweeney deployed don't, in fact, apply. And I think, in the same way that the Tory party has been completely right footed by reform, I think the Labour Party is undergoing a similar problem, which is that the groups of people that previously would have automatically voted for Labour, Muslims, the LGBT community, sort of left-wing Jews and white working class voters, are now being drawn to Reform and to the Green Party. And it leaves this rather uncomfortable middle ground, which Starmer was trying to embody. And as we know, the problem with Starmer was that McSweeney wanted a malleable puppet that he could use to beat Corbyn. And out of power, McSweeney was a really good strategist. He brought down Corbyn, he won the election. But I think it shows up is that McSweeney wasn't very good at advising when they were in government. When they actually had power, the number of missteps, taking heating off pensioners, undermining disabled people's benefits. I mean, these are really rookie mistakes. And I think McSweeney, great in terms, I mean, not great, obviously, as a person. I don't think he was great, but from a strategic point of view, him and Mandelson were very good. But what we saw under New Labour was Mandelson was a shockingly bad minister. He got sacked twice. And what we see in this government is that Starmer and Morgan McSweeney and Mandelson were really shit. And so
Yeah, I
I think
mean,
that's evidence. And I think what you see in that is the way that the Shabana Mahmood and Yvette Cooper and Wes Streeting have leaned into authoritarian Labour as a way of trying to reach out, not just to reform, but a kind of old school 70s Labour state power, very David Blunkett, 90 Sheffield and London. And that actually isn't a winning combination because we're not in that era anymore.
yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is that what they've created is a situation where the far right was never going to trust them. They've destroyed the trust of the left, and they have no candidates who can plausibly regain the trust of the left. Um, and Morgan McSweeney's the skills base for winning power internally and winning power externally are not the same skill
No.
bases. Being a clever manipulator of internal politics is something which you can do with a relatively small crew of people who know how to smear and push people out and make life so difficult people don't want to be involved and all this kind of stuff. But in terms of understanding broad movements of people, the one thing that they understood and exploited in the election in 2024 was um, the complete, like, no one is going to vote Tory this time round, and saying
Mm.
we are the only option. But as you say, the moment they decoupled themselves from the left to the extent that the left started looking elsewhere seriously, then that whole coalition breaks apart. Um, and now, of course, you've got a situation where, like, they're in the worst possible position in temporal terms, if you like, because uh, Reform have not had a government. So, whilst they are able to screw up on a local government level, um, they still have the excuse of we need to be in government, not just in local councils, to show what we can do. So they can make all of these promises and say all of these things and say we're going to fix everything, and the Greens can do the same thing on the left. Um, I think a lot of the longer term, even on the party political basis, the longer term kind of red left is very suspicious of the Greens because
Oh,
we
yeah.
have a lot of experience of working in, for example, Brighton, where they were infamously doing their best to break, I think it was a bin workers' strike, um, which got very uncomfortable for Caroline Lucas at one point. Uh, they come from primarily a green position first. And whilst I think that Polanski has re emphasized red politics and has drawn a lot of red people in, that uh, DNA, the DNA that runs through the Greens, is not coherently socialist, if you like. So it's very unclear as to whether the Greens would do an actual socialist program should they get close to power, and if they or if they would do a Greens in Germany version where they start making, like the Lib Dems in the UK, they start making coalitions with some dodgy people on the grounds that we're prioritizing saving the climate and all this kind of stuff. And if they did get into power, neither they nor you, but your party, nor you know any other smaller kind of more radically sounding party would have any difference in terms of the pressures that are on them that Labour today has, or the Tories before Labour had, or Reform would have, right? Like, from an anarchist perspective, we can look at this and say, look, you can talk as good a game as you like about how, you will reinstate benefits for the working class, you'll reinvest in local economies, you'll re-energize local communities and all this kind of stuff. But the fact is that if you do anything too radical, the markets will smack you
Yeah,
about and tell you to stop doing it.
I
Um,
think I certainly think what Zach Polanski has become very good at, and this you can see this in some of the messaging from the Labour sort of spin doctors, is Zach Polanski goes on the television and he's an actor, he's a communicator, and he's not in Parliament. He's a freewheeler, and like Nigel Farage before him, what they are good at is saying the right things that people want to hear. So, he's like currently he's having a good go at Palantir. And of course that makes West Streeting extremely uncomfortable, but it
Deservedly
sounds
so.
great. It's just spot on, isn't it? And as the Labour Party have been saying, is it's fantasy economics, because the bond market went into a bit of a nosedive even when Andy Burnham, who isn't even in power, made some comments about whether or not the country should be beholden to the bond market. It doesn't take much now. I think we live in a post-trust world where the bond market has discovered its direct power. I mean, obviously they've always been there. I'm old enough to remember when the IMF had to intervene under the Jim Callaghan government. So, the international capital has never gone away. It's just that for a long time they didn't actively intervene. But with Truss, they actively intervened and they brought down a prime minister. And on one level, I think we should have all been a lot more concerned or angry about the fact that a group of not just unelected, but very particularly connected bond dealers, and let's be honest, they are a boys' club, um, brought down a prime minister. No, she wasn't democratically elected, but she was the prime minister of Britain. And now the bond market has become the bogeyman that lives rent free in Rachel Reeves' head.
Yep.
And at the moment, Zach Polanski and Nigel Farage don't care what happens to the bond market. In fact, whatever they say and it makes the bond market work, it's worse for Labour. It means Rachel Reeves has even less money to play around with. She's forced into even more austerity measures, and it makes Labour even more unpopular. I'm not saying that Zach Polanski in particular is deliberately doing things to mess it up, but it's certainly no problem for Zach or Nigel Farage if terrible things happen to Labour and Labour is forced to make terrible choices. I think that only plays out to their benefits. I would say that I think the Your Party is a busted flush.
Oh,
I
yes.
think the idea that Your Party is anything significant. I think for a start off, the amount of time it took them to get their act together meant that Zach Polanski stole most of their popular support. I think the battleground between Stalinist Corbyn and his desires to be the sole party leader and Zara's kind of fantasy democracy, where she's going to nationalize everything under the sun in a way that it's like some kind of Harold Wilson dream factory. Attlee were back in the golden generation of people, although not golden because, of course, they were terrible colonizers. But, I don't think that, I mean, I know people, younger people, who were very excited by the Your Party and went along to the conference, and they all wanted to stand to be in this central committee, which I'm sure is much more democratic than it sounds. But none of them are on the ballots. And I don't know who picks these ballots, by the way. I'm sure it's all very above board and fabulous, but still, there were a lot
No
of
doubt.
very enthusiastic young people drawn to Your Party who I mean, Zara, she's so frustrated by the the fact that the Stalinist sort of Corbynites are hanging on to power, they haven't even got any constituencies yet. She's been reduced to suggesting that people vote Green. Your party co-leader, for want of a better name, is saying vote Green. And as you say, the Green Party are completely unproven in national governments. And we know the track record of the Greens, sometimes very good, sometimes absolutely middle class NIMBYs complaining about. I mean, I remember some years ago, there was a big project on the coast of Scotland. There was a wind farm out of sea, the absolute thing we need to do to deal with the climate situation. And the Greens and a whole bunch of other similar people objected to the cables being laid across some natural farmland because it would ruin the view. Well, you've got to make a decision. I mean, you and I don't have to make those decisions because we have a different way of organizing the world. But if you want to be involved in state-based parties and government, you have to make difficult decisions. And one of them is, if the Green Party want to be serious, they have to lay cables across beautiful landscapes. They have to make difficult decisions. They can't just always be talking about potholes and then fantasy economics about how Zach Polanski is going to magically produce money out of the rich, which he's going to squeeze. And let's be honest, the list of people he's going to help, I mean, it's Santa Claus. I mean, I quite like the Greens, to be honest, out of the
Oh
bad
yeah,
lot
you
of
know,
people. I mean, I'm
I
not
think
a
they're very well
Democrat.
meaning.
I don't believe in democracy. I don't take part in the voting game. I'm not interested in throwing my body into the pit of democratic socialism. But it, from a spectator sport point of view, I think the Greens are quite fun, but not serious.
Yeah, but of course that is the position that Labour is in at the moment is that
Yeah,
you know the Greens are able
Labour are
to make
not
those
fun.
promises because they are unproven.
But also because
Um,
Labour are not fun. I mean, Starmer, they're not fun, are they?
I mean, occasionally
Keir
they're very
Starmer
entertaining,
has
but
the
not through their own
Keir
devices.
Starmer has
Um,
the personality of a potato. He makes these speeches. It's all about service and good citizenship and honest grudge. And then he appoints this man who is corrupt and depraved, knows how corrupt he's depraved, and comes out and does this little speech like he's leaning into white women's fragility. I was lied to. I was lied to. Like some kind of, it's just pathetic. Pathetic.
I actually think
Sorry.
that no, I think there is a oddly enough, I think there's an element to what Morgan McSweeney in particular always projected, which is a no nonsense practicality. Um, that's kind of been Labour's pitch, right? Is that they are cynical enough to make the decisions that need to be made
Mm.
to make the economy function and thus make the country function. You can't take that as your core position and then womble up to a microphone and as you say, oh, I was terribly naive. I was led astray by this mastermind puppeteer. But don't worry, I'm getting rid of the mastermind puppeteer
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Like it's you can't be both. You can't be both um, the cynical, practically minded, hard-headed heavy hitter and a naive kiddie who got you know pulled
Well, I
pulled the
mean,
wrong direction.
I know this is not the topic of the conversation, but Valerie Chomsky's statement was basically the same thing. I am known Chomsky as this brilliant, sophisticated analysis of American power, international, imperialism. But somehow for 7 years, I didn't know. We didn't know what this nasty man was doing. I mean, you can't, these situations, these people, they want both sides. And Starmer wants both sides. He wants to be the man who brought down Corbyn. I mean, I don't, Corbyn is Eurosceptic to his bones. I mean, he's not the hero that people want him to be. But at the same time, for Starmer's response at the dispatch box to be, well, I brought down Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, it's yesterday's news. I mean, by far. And if
Can't keep
that's
leading on that one. Yeah.
and let's be honest, if that's the extent of your CV, I mean, I brought down Jeremy Corbyn and enabled a genocide. I mean, that's not really what I would say was a great CV.
It's
I mean,
also like
maybe he's looking
saying
for
you
his.
brought down Jeremy Corbyn when in fact you were supportive of Jeremy Corbyn right up
Well,
to the last moment and only sort of betrayed the principles Jeremy Corbyn stood on, really. Um,
I mean, I
because
think
yeah,
it's like maybe Keir Starmer's going to follow his predecessor Blair and become some kind of roving. I mean, no, he hasn't got the personality, has he? I mean, potatoes
I
don't
mean, it's
make great diplomats.
difficult
He
to say
did. I
what
did
Keir Starmer
notice,
would
though.
be
I did
ready would
notice
be workable for him.
Starmer went onto the international stage very quickly after becoming prime minister, and it became very clear, just like Blair, that he liked being out there, being
Yeah, yeah.
taken seriously by the big men, going over and brokering, that phrase, standing world against world. He liked being taken seriously. It must be an incredible ego boost to be standing on the stage with the leaders of Europe and the President of the United States. And it must be very hard to come back to earth and have to sit round a cabinet of people who say yes to you, whatever, and make decisions about how they're going to deal with the fact that the bond markets are in fact running the economy. I imagine it's quite disappointing.
Yeah, I can imagine so. On which note, we should probably move on to our
Yeah, I
next
think we
topic because
should.
we've missed a whole set. So the next topic is heavy rains as a factor of climate change and exposing the continued shortcomings of infrastructure. So this is a story where rain has been falling for the last 40 days in some parts of the UK. There has been flooding, obviously. Um, there's been an increasing amount of flooding over the last however many years. Uh, I think the thing which sort of I was picking up on in the article is that particularly the west of the country, which obviously Britain mostly gets rain on the western side, um, there's now been an increasing amount of rain for quite some time. There's been a lot of flooding that's been happening. The infrastructure improvements do not seem to be keeping up with
No.
the situation, and of course, increasingly there are towns and villages which are becoming almost impossible to insure, and at some point probably will be impossible to insure if you don't sort that kind of thing out. Oh, we have Rob, who seems to have joined. I was yeah. Okay. So once Rob sorted out. Um, so yeah. So in terms of topic, if Rob can hear me, I don't know whether this comes up.
Hello, I can hear you. I think, Simon, can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Rob. Yes, I can. We can't see you at the moment, but we're
Oh,
we're currently half an hour in, um, and are on the topic of flooding and rain primarily,
okay.
which you're welcome to it. Welcome to join in on. Um,
I
Well,
would
I'd love
say,
to. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to work out the video thing. But anyway, oh, start video. Hang on. Does that work? Can you see me now?
Possibly.
can I just jump in?
Oh, sure.
One of the things I think contextually is at the moment, or just recently, there's been a hurricane in the Mediterranean.
Yes.
And so what we are experiencing now is the sort of things with the weather that I was told when I was young wouldn't be happening till the year 2100. And what we're seeing is the climate change is happening at a pace faster than we thought it was. And it's clear from the climate scientists, it's happening faster than they thought it was. So one of the things I think is happening now to places like Britain is, when I was young in the time of the ozone layer, we were being told that Britain was going to be a desert and it was going to be hot and, all this sort of stuff. I think we're seeing a combination of the austerity of the Cameron Osborne project, where they took money out of infrastructure, out of local councils, out of Europe regional areas, and put it into the bond market and other things. We're seeing the deleterious effect of Brexit, where the kinds of big EU funding that would have come in to fund those big projects has gone away. And we're also seeing the fact that weather is happening faster to us. So we've got hurricanes in the Atlantic, we've got rains, 40 days of rain down the west coast. We've seen unseasonable hot and cold weather. And this is not going to get any better. And as we've already established, the Labour Party, the Labour government, doesn't have access to the resources to put in to the kinds of things that will make a difference to the people living on the west coast of England, Wales and Scotland, Wales in particular. And I'm sure this is going to be true of Ireland as well, because they experience the same kind of thing.
Sure.
Can you see me?
Yes, you're slightly dinged on the angle, but
Oh, sorry. It's just that I disappeared into a big black screen then.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very much, this ties into what we've been talking about the not inevitability of the economy, but in terms of party political approaches to the economy, where it's always chasing after spending the least possible amount of money and allowing the most possible amount of money to flow upwards to the holders of bonds and to the ultra rich. And without, when you have a situation where the primary solution that capitalism came up with for the environment and climate change, and saying if we do things like improving insulation and getting more solar panels and wind power and doing climate like a climate market and all this kind of stuff, then we can kind of start to reduce the inputs. When that has failed, and you then also have a situation where you can't actually build, you end up with, all right, so we can't fix the climate, but we can try and be more resilient. But you can't do that either because you haven't got any money, or specifically the state doesn't have any money. At which point you're like, okay, so capitalism is not capable of protecting us or saving us from itself. And the state is not capable of protecting us from the results of capitalism being unable to save itself. So the only thing that's left is us. That is literally the only possibility. Both key groupings are in the process of failing.
And I think
Can I
another
jump
group,
in there?
yeah.
Is that sorry? Can you two see me?
No, you're still
No,
a
well, look,
name at the moment. That's fine.
I'm sorry. I'll just have to carry on like that for the moment.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm so pleased that you sort of came to land on where you actually landed on that one there, Simon, because you're quite right. The economy, the capitalist system, all the rest of it, that's not going to get us out of it. Neither is the state. And so if you've got to avoid a politics of despair, then it's got to sort of land somewhere. And it seems as though you're saying at the end of that it's going to land with us. And there, I mean, for people who are watching this, what sort of a message do we want to try and put out to people as how we as anarchists see that we want to approach this position and things, and what can we say which is constructive? Because I just find that I'm asking a rhetorical question here because I find that very difficult to answer myself. Just sticking solar panels on your roof and cycling around rather than driving a car seems to be the ultimate sort of pissing in the wind type of approach to the thing. And so as anarchists, I suppose we've got to sort of come up with something which is a bit more of a collective type of approach to this. And it's got to be a far bigger picture, which is going to sort of take into account our position with regard to transportation, our position with regard to housing, and so on and so forth. It's the big question, really, isn't it? Climate change, or it seems to me as that's the big question of our times. I was so interested just to see a few comments from you earlier on to see that we were talking about the 1990s, and I think you said, Simon, you were at school, and
Yes.
and then the other person who's in the room with me. Sorry, I haven't picked up on names yet. I'm sitting here on a blank screen. I was probably teaching you, Simon, and I was I was running around doing all sorts of things in 1990s. In actual fact, in the 1990s, I was doing the job that Uri Gordon's doing at the moment. But there we go. It's another story. But anyway, you can't see me on the screen. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a feel as to who I am and where I'm coming from here.
I think the thing we have to be very careful of as anarchists is that we don't start imagining that our responsibility is to come up with big solutions. It's, of course, we need to be thinking about how do we deal with sort of issues like climate change or, housing or insulation or transport. But it's not our job to organize the state. It's not our job to organize people in a big, massive basis. That isn't the kind of anarchism that I'm interested in. I don't want to be imagining that our interventions in the debate and in the argument is that we're going to find a solution for housing on some macro scale. Because to me, that just ends up with statist ideas. What I would like to say is at the moment, what we need to be doing is exploring and suggesting to people that they have solutions of their own and that they have ideas, because I think that people are able to, we need to get people to break out of this idea that the only solution to the flooding in the west of England is to vote Green or to go to another meaningless conference organized by some left-wing group. This is not going to be the solution to anyone. And I think our first task is to break democracy and break this fantasy idea that every 4 years you put an X on the paper like an illiterate and vote for an individual who will toe a party line and will offer you a solution which won't in fact have anything to do with you or your neighbours or your constituents or your community.
Yeah, I'm nodding. You can't see me on a video, but I'm nodding. I do agree with you entirely, and I agree with you. And I think that you're saying in a way what I'm trying to say more inadequately, and that we do want to give some kind of a message to people. We don't want to give them a solution. That's obviously not going to happen. But yeah, we want to. Our position largely is that you don't just put a cross on a piece of paper once every 4 or 5 years, or how often it is, and that you pass the responsibility, you pass the buck on to somebody else. I think there's another aspect within the anarchists, within our groups. I wonder, Simon, who was it who published Welcome's Inner City by Colin Ward? Was that a Freedom Press publication or was it somebody else?
It wasn't. I can't. I have it somewhere in my house, but I couldn't swear to who it was. But it wasn't us. We did buy. I think we were involved in some way because we did have like a big, several boxes of it, which we'd clearly gotten hold of somewhere. But I think it was another group in the end.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a literature out there, and some of it is probably a bit out of date now. But you do, or at least I do. I think of names like Colin Ward as people who were discussing the sorts of questions which are worthy of discussion, I suppose. And Colin Ward certainly wasn't somebody who was wanting to get involved in what's called democratic politics.
There was certainly.
Sorry.
Well, there was certainly a strain of anarchism that Ward was fairly emblematic of, and obviously there was that whole crew. I think Alan Albin wrote at the same time as well, and so Deep Ecology and Anarchism has a bunch of them in it, including Brian Morris as well. Thinking about it, and they all had they all kind of discussed elements of kind of more holistic approaches to ecology, I suppose. Would be
Yeah.
a rough
And I mean, one of
summation.
our trustees, Peter Marshall, he's a name that would come up in something
Yes,
like that, because
absolutely. Yeah.
he wrote a book, Ecology and Anarchism. Did he write a book called that with that title? It was something like that, I think.
Quite possibly.
So I mean,
I'm
there's a rich vein, there's a rich seam of thinking and discussion within the anarchist, let's say, movement. I'm not sure if I'm happy with the word, but we can say that with it on the anarchist scene, shall we say then? But there is a rich seam of discussion around this debate, and it would be nice to see it sort of continued and perhaps progressed into modern times. It's a fascinating discussion. Are we talking at some time this evening about Psychops? Have I missed that?
Well, we've Spike Ops is going to be next.
Okay.
Which we probably should get to fairly soon. But yes, I mean, I think there is more of a conversation that goes into, because obviously you've got a spectrum of stuff which is more theoretical, more practical stuff, which kind of verges onto platformism, which obviously would be where you do come up with a platform as anarchists, etc., etc. Not so popular these days, but I remember it being more notable in the 90s, 2000s. But yeah, I think there's more of a conversation that goes on in academia. So you get kind of conversation which happens through the Anarchist Studies Network, for example, which goes into more kind of depth on thinking about anarchism and ecological activity and action. Obviously, what we tend to do here is much more kind of reactive and reflective on what we see happening in the news, which is less likely to, you have 10, 15 minutes, you're not going into serious academic level depth. But yeah, I think it's very much
I
worth
understand
having those conversations.
I'll be honest with you. I mean, I think to most people living in the west of England or living in Italy, the theoretical debates taking place in universities is not very interesting. And I think the resurrecting the kind of deep ecological and sociological discussions about how we might organize the cities after some potential revolutionary moment is also not going to win many hearts and minds. What we need to be doing is approaching people and debating and suggesting to them that they are free and they can be free. And I'm not saying that there is no point to academia, but I'm not an academic and I'm not a political theorist. And I personally switch off when people start talking about that. What I am is a pragmatic anarchist activist who has been out in the community doing the graft of talking to people, ordinary people, on a regular basis for 45 years.
Yeah, I think I mean I would tend to agree. I think there is a strong risk, and certainly, the Anarchist Studies Network does some very interesting work if you're into that sort of thing, but it's not very good in terms of, as you say, talking to everyday people about their lives essentially and how they interact with the world.
I'm not saying, can I just say that was very harsh? I'm not saying that the Anarchist Network and all of those studies and discussions and books that have been written are valueless and we should throw them all in the bin. I'm just saying that sometimes people overemphasize the importance of the written texts and political theorizing of anarchism over the hardcore being in the world, dealing with people. And what we're doing on this program is talking about that kind of political theorizing in government and the ways in which people are countering and based on how we organize society. And I'm very, very wary of anarchism not recognizing that, for me, the ultimate point of anarchism is that we are free and that we believe in the audacity that if we trust each other and we believe in love and truth, we can find a justice and an equality of our own making.
That's a lovely segue into the Psychops thing, isn't it?
It is,
Talking about
absolutely,
trust of comrades and things like that.
Yes, so for a very brief summary, for folks who don't know, Jim Boyling, also aka Jim Sutton at the time, was involved in environmental and animal rights activist groups and has been giving evidence at the Spy Cops inquiry this week. And among other things, he was saying, there's a direct quote, "At no time before or during my deployment was I ever specifically told not to have sexual relationships while in my undercover identity." He essentially goes on to sort of say there was an attitude of don't ask, don't tell, and that half of the SDS undercover officers he was in the unit with had sexual relationships with activists on the ground specifically that would give them a form of immunity against suspicion, or breaking through the glass ceiling of acceptance, as he so flowery putting it. Yeah, I mean, again, not something which is of much surprise to anybody who's been following the Spy Cops saga, I don't think. You know, various of the Spy Cops have been more or less saying the same thing. Some of them have been making excuses or not showing up at all. But fairly, Boyling was fairly big name, as I understand it, at the time, and a classic case of the man with van who infiltrated the movement. Yeah, what do folks think about this latest, and in general about kind of how the case has been going? I don't know how far people have been following it.
Yeah, I'm not very good at following what people normally refer to as the news, I have to say. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't turn up here on a Thursday evening. There are others, and that's just how it is. But the thing about the psychops thing, and it is very pertinent to what was just being said a moment or two ago about trust of comrades and things like that. And I just wondered, I suppose this is mainly more for you, Simon, but I mean, how aware are you that Freedom Press was infiltrated by these people in the 1990s?
Oh, I did a bit of research on it. God, what was his name? I would need to look it up. It's been quite a while, but there was a guy who infiltrated us, wrote for us a few times. Roger Thorley, I
Right.
think. So there was a certain bit of, because Freedom obviously is a building in the middle of London, and well known as kind of a stopping off point for people starting out in anarchism and all that kind of stuff. Roger Pierce was his real name. He later became head of the SDS, in fact. So all of the complaints that Boyling makes about upper management's lack of interest, Pierce is sort of tacitly placed in that position, I suppose. His role, essentially, because I think he was trained as a lawyer, and he wrote these quite lawyerly pieces for Freedom for a while. His most notable bit, so he was never part of the core editorial group. His most notable bit was that he at one point went to Northern Ireland on a fact-finding mission for Freedom, which obviously means that you've got a Met spy cop going to Northern Ireland in the 1980s, which sort of out of the way of the Met, really. Particularly
Well,
at
Simon,
that time, a bit on the dodgy side.
the infiltration of Freedom Press was far more deeper than maybe you are aware. Some of the documents which have been released in the Psychops trial, and I can send you links if that's of any use to you. There's a load of redacted documents which are now being released. And it is quite clear that there was somebody who was in the editorial group at Freedom Press in the 1990s who attended Freedom Press meetings and refers by name to a number of people who I knew quite well personally at the time. And so there was somebody who either was directly attending meetings, or they were directly in contact with people who were attending meetings. And these are people who were attending meetings along with editors like Vernon Richards. They were not people who were writing articles for Freedom which were being published by Freedom. They were people who were actually attending meetings held by members of Freedom Press, and were reporting back to the police on what they were hearing there. Now, the reason I'm telling you this now is because, as I'm saying, the reason I'm raising this question is it's all to do with trust. And it's all to do with trust within the Freedom Collective. And it's very difficult to know who is coming in and out the door as to who one is in a position to trust within the organisation. And that remains, I think, the situation today.
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. So in 1989, I was the press officer for ACT UP London. And in 1990, I was working with Chris Tchaikovsky from Women in Prison, and we were looking into the incidence and life expectancy of women with HIV in British prisons. And Chris Tchaikovsky had an inner Home Office private report that was looking at the number of deaths of women who died of malnutrition in Durham A Wing. And she sent me this copy of this report by post. It arrived in a plastic bag, torn into small pieces. And then from then on, for the next 6 months, my mail was opened, letters that were opened, my telephone rang off the hook. Sometimes I would lift the phone up and the phone would continue to ring. People I knew, cars were burgled, my house was burgled. And this continued for 6 months until eventually at an ACT UP meeting, I announced that I was no longer going to be investigating this issue because of the harassment. And the next day, the telephone didn't ring. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think there is a tendency for the Spy Cops trial, which of course the SDS's behaviour over time, across time, and the way they use sex as a weapon, it's absolutely appalling. But on other levels, I find it difficult to understand why the anarchist movement during the 70s, 80s, and 90s didn't think that it was being infiltrated by the state. There was a very interesting episode in the 80s where it turned out that a worker in the CND office worked for MI5. Again, I'm not judging. I don't want to make comments about minimizing the absolute distress that women experienced being deceived and being raped by the state. I think that was unbelievably despicable and should be condemned at all times. But the Spy Cop case has brought into a thing as if the entire movement was somehow shocked that they were being infiltrated by the police and that somehow everybody was taking part as if everyone was surprised. In ACT UP meetings, our first statement in the period between 89 and 93 was to say, we need to draw attention to the people in this room that there may be police in this room taking notes. And what I find fascinating and a little bit shocking is it doesn't seem that basic understanding of police behaviour was taking place. I wasn't involved in Reclaim the Streets. I wasn't involved in the M11. I was up to my neck in the AIDS crisis, in queer rights and BDSM. I spent the 90s burying people. I wasn't fighting against the Rhodes movement. And again, I'm not in any way dismissing or negating the value of that movement. It's just that people involved in the kind of politics I was involved in were never under any illusions that we were not at any point being investigated by the state. So I'm listening to you talking about the fact that there must have been somebody in the Freedom Collective publishing the things. There must have been someone in ACT UP sending information, or there must have been somebody being leaned on in ACT UP sending information so that my mail and my phone and my house was being attacked on a regular basis until I took the pedal off the investigation of what was happening inside police prisons.
Yeah. I had my phone was being tapped in the late 1970s as well, and I think that the point here is twofold. One, yes, you're quite right. I think that a lot of activists are unaware of the fact that they have been infiltrated by the state. I think you need to take it almost as read that that is what is going on. I think you just sort of accept that it's the way things are. Having said that, the other prong in this is what, if anything, can you do to protect yourself from this sort of a thing? And when you go online, you can read documents saying that you look out for people who don't have a background and people who are, as you mentioned a moment ago, Simon, who are regularly available with a car or a van or something like that. But a lot of this advice is going back into a period of time which was a little bit more pre-digital. And I think protecting oneself when one is online is a far more difficult thing, and it's a far more difficult thing, and there are far more opportunities to get infiltrated, obviously, than there were even going back into the 70s, 80s and 90s.
Well, we know now that Signal, that there are backdoors. We know now that people who've been using Signal as a secure space, which can't be, we know from cases in America where they have been accessing information that was in Signal chats. So there is obviously there are obviously backdoors.
This is more my era. So one of the things, I mean, I will say one of the things which is probably worth noting on the Spike Ops saga particularly is that I think there are various cases where people were unmasked as infiltrators at that time, and I think that there was an undercurrent certainly in the 70s and 80s of people being like, there probably is someone in the group or in a related group. There probably is a certain amount of infiltration going on. I think the thing which tended to shock people about Spike Ops, and it was a shock to newer generations, just how egregious the type of infiltration was.
Yes,
like when I got into activism, it was very much like, yeah, there might be a Spike Op, there might be a spy in there somewhere, but they'll probably just be taking notes and then heading back home again. The idea of actively raping someone to gain enough cover to be a spy cop, I think shocked an awful lot of people.
I mean, yes, and I think you're right. As I said, I don't want to minimize, and I probably have minimized in my sort of ebullience. I had minimized. I certainly don't want anyone to think that I underestimate both the appalling betrayal and distress that people experienced, but also, of course, the fact that the state, and you said this man Boyling, whoever he is, has basically said, that it was effectively policy to do this to people as a method of gaining trust and acceptance. I mean, that is revolting. It is just revolting. But I do wonder if this is, we've seen this because of this Spike Up trial. But you have to ask, has this tactic, is this new to the 1990s, or is it just that they've been caught out and they've been doing it before and they're probably doing it now?
This is something which is well worth bearing in mind, is that the law was changed in the wake, or I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, because so much stuff was coming out, and the law was not changed to make it illegal to do this. It was changed to make it legal to do this. It was made legal to break the law. It was made legal to basically undertake any action you wanted, was covered by this law, as long as it meant that you were catching someone in the act of, terrorism or breaking the law in an organized way, essentially. So in terms of legal protection, the spy ops are now better protected than they were when they were doing it in the 90s. The irony
can I just add to that, sorry to jump in, is that if I remember rightly, that law also enabled informants of the police to break the law in order to gain information. So not just spy cops and the police.
Genuinely horrifying law.
It's also worth remembering that Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, whipped his own party to abstain on that. So you know, again, if we're looking for reasons to hate Keir Starmer, here's a really,
Is
really good
a really good
example.
one, yeah. But in response to the whole thing about sort of modern day, I suppose, spy copying, um, so in terms of like physical infiltration, like I wouldn't be surprised if there were a person who was gently keeping tabs on, say, freedom or various different groups. I think it's a lot of it depends on perceived level of threat.
Mm,
Um, whether they can be asked to send someone in, basically. Um, a lot of it they just don't need to anymore because I think the idea of say cracking like Signal or WhatsApp groups or breaking encryption, um, they are looking into it. They're going to they occasionally it gets brought up. Can we put a backdoor in this, that, or the other program? Most of the time, though, they just don't need it because most groups will invite people to a meeting, and at that meeting, if someone seems enthusiastic, they'll add them to a Signal group.
yeah,
And by adding them to the Signal group, all that person never has to come to another meeting because that account will sit there for 6 months until someone remembers to take it off again.
yeah,
Yeah.
And for that whole of that time, they will simply be gathering who's who and what that person is saying, who's the most aggressive voice in the room, etc., etc. They'll be building it into their database of networks. Like the only way really online to be safe is to think. I mean, the classic is never say anything online that you would be unhappy to hear read out in court.
yeah,
And the corollary of it is whatever you're saying, assume a copper is reading it, basically.
Mm.
If you that's the only way of being absolutely 100% certain that what you're doing is not going to get you in trouble. And then if you're organizing anything more circumspect than that, do it in person. Don't have your phone in the same room.
I think people, I think people need to. I mean, I think it's worth people making not decision in the sense of I'm only going to do this, but recognizing there are two forms of activism in a digital world. There are those of us who operate above ground, who, write things on social media, post things on Instagram, write articles in freedom, speak our mind very openly and damn the consequences. And then there are people doing things, say, Hansabs, where they have to organize themselves with more discretion, with more understanding, more recognition, and they can't afford to be having discussions online. And a whole range of other activities, well, Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil, all of these organizations would have had two layers. You have your public facing layer where you talk freely and openly to the media. And then you have your layer about where you decide when you're going to strategically commit non-violent direct action. Now, of course, and probably other things too. Of course, a lot of that kind of organizations have also been broken by a number of different tactical decisions by the government in relation to crime. But ultimately, I think that's a kind of decision. And if you are involved in activism, which is going to involve in breaking the law, then you don't have that discussion online because you can't trust anybody or the organization or the app that you're using because all of it will be fed, as you say. People add people to Signal chats all the time, and you have no idea who they are. And they may not know.
As Pete Hegseth found to his cost. Um, yes. This has all been very good conversation. I am aware that we have now hit our hour, which is roughly the amount of time we usually tend to do. I will very briefly move on to two freedom stories just to highlight them very quickly. One being sabotage mass protests at the Winter Olympics, which is written by Gabriel Fonten, talking about clashes in Milan following the vandalism of 70 showers in the Olympic Village, and 10,000 people taken to the streets of Milan on Saturday, the 7th of February, to protest the first day of the Winter Olympics. it goes into some depth about the actual protests, why they were taking place, the impact that they had. Well worth a read. And then the other one is Palestine looking Erasure in the eye. And this is talking about coordinated settler attacks backed by the Israeli army, displacing thousands of villages in the West Bank. And as we know, variations of this have been going on for a long time, but Israel has been ramping it up, even to the point that actual other national governments are complaining, which is not unheard of, but much rarer than it should be, really. And yes, again, it's a good breakdown and roundup of what's going on and worth a read. Right, on which note, thank you very much to our watchers, and to Rob and to Kell. Thank you to another Dafty who has made a couple of decent notes in the comments, noting WhatsApp itself is not encrypted. It was revealed last week, and WhatsApp had said it was encrypted, but in fact isn't, suggesting that smash your Ring camera. Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah.
Any Ring cameras are an absolute nightmare, both for security and obviously for anything being recorded. And yeah, there are a couple of other comments in there as well. So we shall ring off now. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.